the 49ers recently lost Brandon Ayuk for the season.
Get well soon.
Knee injury, ACL, MCL, which means this isn't a normal recovery time for him. He might even miss some games next year as well. This is how serious of an injury it was. And what are their problems, really? I think you can attribute the root of their problems to injuries. Yeah. CMC, Ayuk now is hurt. Deebo Samuel has pneumonia. George Kittle also a bit banged up. Jennings didn't play last game. I definitely think against KC, once Ayuk went out, it was apparent what the Chiefs defense did. It wasn't exotic blitz looks. It was just straight man-to-man coverage, normal pressure packages, and nobody could get any separation. Now, the 49ers this year are one of the worst teams against man coverage. Last year, they were one of the best. This is not the same team, and I don't know how you can call this team a contender when they lost their best receiver against man coverage, and there's just so many injury concerns with this team. Before the year, I was contemplating picking the Seahawks to win the West because I kind of did have a gut feeling that the Niners were going to get some injuries because they've had some great injury luck in the past. Mainly 2023, they had great injury luck, but every year before that, they were really banged up. But I didn't want to forecast injuries, and we know that when they're fully healthy, they're talented. But, I mean, this team has a lot of holes, and now moving forward, I mean, even with Ayuk out, you still have Jennings, Deebo, Kittle, CMC when he's back. This is kind of where Brock Purdy has to prove himself. Like, this is the contract year for him.
You're a Brock guy now, too, huh?
His playmaking improved. I think everything else is pretty much regressed from Brock Purdy. His red zone numbers, he's slow to get the ball out. Every single interception against the Chiefs, I don't think he was in a good offense situation because he didn't have no receivers, but he can't also make the problem worse. And all three of those interceptions were inexcusable outside of the second one. The first one to George Kittle was inexcusable. The second one, Ronnie Bell, miscommunication, I can understand that. But then the third one in the red zone, you had the receiver bracketed and you still threw it. Yeah. Like he has not been playing on time this year. And coming into the year, we knew that last year he was elite when he was playing on time, anticipation, accuracy, all those things were great. This year, he make at a high level. So I'm thinking if you couple that with what you already have, now we're talking about a different tier you're walking into. But that has gotten better while all the things that made him great last year have regressed at the same time, which is why, to me, I still view him in the same tier of quarterback. You know, he's in that 11 to 15 range, but this is the year that he's really going to have to prove himself. He's throwing into tighter windows this year. The only quarterback that is throwing into tighter windows is Dak Prescott. Number 2 has been Brock Purdy. You look at last year, Brock Purdy was in the bottom 10. I mean, he was having open windows. So I don't know. This 49ers team just feels broken right now, and there's a lot of problems, you know. And the offense is the first one you point at because they just haven't been able to run the ball like they did last year, and that's because CMC's out.
I got a couple things. One, talking about Brock Purdy. This game was bad, objectively. He didn't play well. I will also agree with multiple parts. One, I think he played bad. 2, I think he also did play bad because his weapons went out early. Deebo played a handful of snaps. He couldn't give it a go. And I get it. You had pneumonia. You shouldn't have even been on the field. That was ill-advised from the coaching staff and the trainers. Brandon Ayuk has been so up and down this season. I think that he has had some separation. And, of course, we understand that he's great against man. But you've had a drop problem. And we had a drop in this game, a pretty bad one. Now, again, prayers to Brandon Ayuk. $30 million annually for the next 4 years. Thank God that he sat out and got his money because he's set for life, because this game's dangerous and at any moment that it can be taken away from you. But again, he should be back, God willing, and he should be at 100%. But Brandon Ayuk hadn't been the same level of wide receiver. George Kittle's been a superstar.
It's been great.
He's been the best tight end in football, hands down.
Foot too.
He's been amazing. Considering that CMC has not been out here, this one game and the Minnesota game also, which I think Purdy could have played a little bit better in. Outside of that,
Arizona.
I don't blame that on Purdy. The kicker got injured, and then that ended up costing them the result. The result of the game was not on Brock Purdy. I think the result on the game was unfortunate circumstance with Moody also getting injured. I think that was a win. I look at this one game by the Chiefs. I won't overblow it for Brock Purdy because considering you don't have the guy on your offense in CMC, I feel as if two things can be true. I agree with the playmaking aspect. He's been much better in that regard. I think that now that he has a lot of time in the pocket because this offensive line has improved, it's getting in his head, and now he's doing a little bit too much, and now it's missing the timing of what was their bread and butter last season. So now you want to let plays develop so you can have that big play, but the aspect of your game that was really refined last season, you've gone away from it because you have this luxury of an amazing offensive line and just being able to maneuver around the pocket and behind the line of scrimmage. I think that this team is not a contender right now because of the injuries, but like you mentioned, with CMC coming back, I'll stay relatively optimistic because of the boost that he will give them offensively. The concern will always be there with the injury with CMC, but if he's back, you get a huge boost in the receiving game, a huge boost in the rushing game. He can go and he can couple that with Jordan Mason and his hard-nosed brute type of run style. And you pair that with CMC, who also has a similar style, but more finesse, way better as a pass catcher. And you could do multiple things with him on the field. You can also have him out in slot and Jordan Mason on the field at the same time. There's just a lot of things that you can do when he returns. And with the way that with Jennings, the way that he's been playing, it sucks losing Ayuk. He's one of your best weapons. I think Debo and Kittle have been 1 and 2 in my opinion so far this season. So obviously it hurts losing him, but with the way that Juwan's played, it's a blow, but at least it's not a drastic meteor like type situation where we have to make a move for a wide receiver or we're screwed. I think if CMC comes back, there's still an opportunity for this team to play winning football and potentially be contending at the end of the season. But where we stand right now, there's so many injuries on the squad. Wow. I get the idea of counting them out.
Yeah, look, has this been the Niners' year? Not at all. You look at the injuries down the board, you mentioned it. Obviously, CMC's been out so far every single week, but you do have your bye week after this Cowboys game coming up at home.
Need it bad.
If they beat the Cowboys, which is an average, banged-up team, and you move into your bye week 4-4, getting CMC then back for week 10, I think their season's still alive. But is this Niners team ceiling Super Bowl? Like the teams in the NFC North, definitely not. Mm-hmm. If you look at the injuries, CMC, we can't really rush him back into the lineup coming off an Achilles injury because the likelihood of him then re-aggravating that and potentially worse is pretty possible. You lose your best separator. You have guys like George Kittle playing quite well. Even he has a little sprained foot. You look at Juwan Jennings, he has a hip injury. Debo Samuel, as a number 1 wide receiver who has to be manning up on the line of scrimmage, kind of gain the focal point of opposing secondaries.
Respect Debo. He's been really great this year.
Definitely, but you now put him into that primary role of line up against press more.
Pneumonia is also crazy. That feels like that's something that could linger, you know?
What? Pneumonia?
Agreed.
Pneumonia as well is brutal. Luckily, he's discharged from the hospital. I don't think he's going to be any better now that Ayuk's at the lineup or any more productive or efficient in those opportunities that he gets because of really I wouldn't say his play style is limited, but it's a specific role that he has to play. So I look at San Francisco's ceiling, and I think it's much lower than last year. I don't see a Super Bowl ceiling. But this division is so wide open. You have the Seahawks in first place. The Cardinals are tied in second. All they need is one win right here against the Cowboys in Week 8. If they can get that done, I think they'll still be fine.
Yeah, and they also said there's no timetable for Debo's return. Again, like, I don't know. Is that something you come back in a week? Does that take a couple weeks to get fully back from? Like, obviously, we know how tough Debo is. The fact that he was on the sideline tells you all you have to know. But it's crazy how quick things in the NFL can change, right? You go from the best weapons room in the NFL and Brock Purdy getting carried by all of his weapons, and now we look up and it's Juwan Jennings, wide receiver 1, Ricky Pearsall, wide receiver 2. Of course, you still have George Kittle, Jordan Mason, and hopefully the return of Christian McCaffrey in a few weeks. But honestly, I think there's going to be some nasty conversations around Brock Purdy these upcoming months because he's due for a contract, right? I think next season is his last year on his rookie deal. He's due for a contract, and everyone's going to expect him to kind of uplift this offense. You're like, oh, well, now's the time to prove it without Ayuk, maybe without Debo. Of course, no Christian McCaffrey, but that's not who Brock Purdy is. Brock Purdy is not Mahomes. He's not Josh Allen. He's not Lamar Jackson. Brock Purdy is the quarterback you have when you have weapons around him, very similar to a Jared Goff, for example. When you put him in the right situation, he is able to play at a really high level. He's able to be better than a Jimmy Garoppolo, for example, and look like a top 15 quarterback and play at a top 12, top 10 level at times. And with everything right around him, he could lead you to a Super Bowl and potentially win it. He has, last season, a couple plays away. But I think the fact that with all of these weapons out, it's going to be difficult for any quarterback, let alone Brock Purdy with his limitations, to uplift this offense. You look at the 49ers right now, going into this game against the Chiefs, so maybe it changed slightly. But in terms of yak percentage, so yards after catch, they are dead last, 32%. The next closest are the Minnesota Vikings at 40%. There is an 8% difference between 32 and 31. So this guy that, for years had been kind of not thrown to the side, but ridiculed because you have Debo and Ayuk and Kittle, some of the best yak guys in the NFL, is getting basically the least amount of help over everybody. You mentioned it, Brandon Ayuk, some highs and lows. It's mostly been lows, right? He had one exceptional week, but outside of that, I think that holdout,
never top 48 yards. After
that holdout really came back to bite him because he is nowhere close to the receiver he was last year, and of course the injury is terrible. So Brock Purdy is getting put in a really tough situation right now that I think it's going to be under a microscope because franchise quarterbacks usually are able to uplift in these situations. But I think we have to be honest with what Brock Purdy is. When everything's right around him, he could play at a top 10-ish level. But when he has to uplift and have Jawan Jennings wide receiver 1, that's when it's going to be difficult. And I think that's when this offense can get ugly. And then some of the other issues that they've had on top of that. They're not dead because the NFC just isn't that great that I think 9-10 wins gets you into the playoffs. I think 10 wins is a lock for the playoffs. They have some, light opponents for them. They're still really well coached. You still have superstars on both sides of the ball when everyone's healthy. But I just think it's going to be a couple of really tough months for Brock Purdy and just his PR in general.
Would you rather Brock Purdy play really, really well and the 49ers have to give him the $50 million a year contract, or kind of right now find out if he can uplift this team, realize he can't, and then not have the pressure to pay him that much money?
I think you want him to play well.
Yeah, no way around it. Yeah. I need my quarterback to play well.
Because then you're looking at, well, who are we going to get next? And I don't want to be in that situation, especially if you're the Niners.
Do you think the Dolphins were like, oh, let's hope Tua sucks? Well, I don't think so. I think we spent good money on you. Yeah. We put high draft capital in you. We want you to play well. We want that.
They're not hoping that he sucks.
I know what you mean.
But I feel like they are looking forward to the opportunity of seeing what he actually is.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I think we saw it last year. I think we're seeing it this year where, although this was the extreme sense.
Yeah, this game is not the game to judge Purdy on. The games to judge Purdy on are when Debo, Jennings, Kittle, CMC, and first-round pick Pearsall are healthy. Mm-hmm. Those are the games, because even with the loss of Ayuk, it is not some unsurmountable thing to overcome. Like, oh my God, there's no Ayuk. You cannot play well anymore. There's still a lot of things in this offense that you could play well with.
I feel like we're still optimistic about the offense if CMC were to return. Yeah. You have Debo, you have Kittle, Juwan.
That's more than enough. And the offensive line's been good. It's top 10 in pass block rate.
Last year it was second in rush DVOA, the offense, and this year it's dropped to 15th. Like, Jordan Mason has had some good box score numbers, but he doesn't threaten defense the same way. They're not running the ball as efficient as they were last year. But yeah, I think this is a make or break year for Brock Purdy. He has to get paid after this year, and you have to see what the value is going to be, based on how he plays. But yeah, I think their play against man coverage has been down. The yak for this team has been down, and every year outside of this year, Shanahan has had a top 5 offense in generating yak. I think that can be attributed to a couple of things. I think it's probably the increased play of man coverage that they're facing, because when you're facing man coverage, once you catch the ball, you are going down. You're getting tackled. Versus zone coverage, there's more space around you, so you have more opportunities to generate yak. And against the Chiefs, Steve Spagnuolo just straight up said, we're playing man on you guys. Like, we don't trust anybody to beat us.
I don't blame them. Great decision.